Kufal Amadalad Amad Base 134b. The Mishnah had said in the first opinion that there's you wash the baby on the first day, and Rabbi Tzvi ben Azariah said you wash the baby even on the third day. Rabbi Tzvi ben Azariah was clear that you wash the baby even by bathing the baby. In the first opinion, there's a question of whether or not you can only bathe the baby, wash the baby by spritzing water on them by hand, or on the first, as Rava said, you can also on the first day wash the baby, bathe the baby properly, and it's on the third day where you could still wash the baby, but it would have to be with spritzing water on the baby. Ki asa, we're basically in the middle of the wide lines of 134b, Kuflamadala and Amadbeis. Ki asa Rav Dimi, when Rav Dimi came, Amar Rabbi Lazar, he said in the name of Rabbi Lazar, Allah Rabbi Lazar ben Azariah. Allah is like Rabbi Lazar ben Azariah, like we said in our Mishnah, that even on the third day, if the baby had a bris on Thursday, so even in the Friday, Shabbos, the third day, you could still bathe the baby in hot water on account of that it is still in the healing process. So the question was asked in Eretz Yisrael. Are we talking about bathing the entire body, or bathing the place where the bris was done, meaning just bathing the bris milah? Amalahu said to them, one of the Chachamim said, and it names him as Rabbi Yaakov, it must mean that it's bathing the entire body of the baby, a complete bath. Because if it's just bathing the wound itself of the bris, is it any different than hot water that you're allowed to put on a wound? The Amar Rav, as Rav had said, you don't withhold hot water and oil on a wound on Shabbos, so you're allowed to put on these basic remedies. So perhaps that would be the same by a bris, and therefore, if we say a special halacha that on a bris, after a bris, the baby is allowed to be bathed for 3 days, according to Rabbi Tzvi ben Azariah, so then the halacha would be that you can bathe the baby fully, the entire body, not only the wound area. Wouldn't you make a distinction between the halacha in regards to bris and the halacha in the general wound? When we said for a general wound that you're allowed to put on oil and warm water, that's talking about hot water that had been prepared before Shabbos. You weren't cooking anything for it. It's just you're using hot water that's already there, and in your pot prepared from before Shabbos. It's been on the stove all of Shabbos, and you're taking some out, and you're putting warm water on the wound. That's different. Over here, we're talking about that you can even warm the water on Shabbos for the baby, but perhaps only to bathe the wound area and not the entire, not give the baby a full bath.
I mean, the Gemara doesn't seem to be making any differentiation between Kollel sheyesh bo sakana or not. And I always thought that a newborn is considered a Kollel sheyesh bo sakana. So why is it that the Gemara is not? I mean, for a Kollel sheyesh bo sakana, you can do pretty much anything. Why is? Do you hear what I'm saying?
No. Say that again.
It's not a question whether you could boil water on Shabbos for to treat a wound. If it's a sakana, if there's a Kollel sheyesh bo sakana, you can do anything. And I always thought that a newborn is a Kollel sheyesh bo sakana.
Well, I'm not sure where you get that a newborn, just for being a newborn, is a Kollel sheyesh bo sakana. Means someone that's sick, that is in danger. You'd have to have some known danger. Just in and of itself, it wouldn't be. But what you have is that the bris is done, and the question is, not knowing of a danger, do we assume that there's a danger? That's what the Mishnah is saying. If you don't have bandaging for the bris, we assume danger and you're allowed to do what's needed to make that bandage. You don't have a coagulant like cumin, then we assume danger and you're allowed to grind it up in a different way, but you can grind it up in order to have the coagulant for the baby. Here we're dealing with what is the assumed sakana, what is the assumed danger. Of course, if we know that the baby has an infection, you can do whatever the baby needs to heal from that infection. But it's the third day after the bris, and the question is, do we assume, not knowing sakana, not knowing danger to the baby, do we assume danger and therefore bathe the baby on the third day and heat water on Shabbos for that? Or do we say, no, only the first day and not the third day? So the conversation here is, do we assume up to what level do we assume danger, even though that we don't know of a particular issue, just preemptive or assumption of that if we don't do this, this is going to cause a danger. So the Gemara wants to make a distinction and say, true, for every ailment you're allowed to use warm water, but that's warm water that was cooked before Shabbos. Here we're talking about warm water that was cooked on Shabbos, but perhaps it still does not indicate to us that you're allowed to bathe the baby entirely and not just the wound area. So Rav Dimi challenged that. How do you know that that's true? That here, when we say that you can bathe the baby, it's hot water cooked on Shabbos specifically for this. Maybe our Mishnah is only talking about hot water that was warm before Shabbos. So you cooked water before Shabbos, you have water on the stove, and you're using that water to bathe the baby. But there's no question about heating water on Shabbos. That's not been mentioned. So Rav Dimi challenged and said, how do you know that we're talking about water that was cooked on Shabbos? So I wanted to respond to Rav Dimi, but Rav Yosef beat me to it, and this is what he said. Because you're allowed to even heat water on Shabbos, because if you don't have hot water, let's say you don't have warm water on the stove, you're not allowed to bathe the baby? Of course you can. As Michael was pointing out now, and then we were talking that we assume sakana, we assume that it's a danger for a baby not to bathe after a bris. And therefore you're allowed to eat the warm water even on Shabbos. Itna Anami, and indeed it was said similarly, Kiyasa Ravin, when Ravin came, and we talked about this many times, that both Rav Dimi and Ravin used to travel from the academies in Eretz Yisrael and the academies in Bavel and report the teachings from one another. And when Ravin came, Amar Rabbi Abo, Amar Rabbi Lazar, he said in the name of Rabbi Abo, in the name of Rabbi Lazar, and some say what he said was in the name of Rabbi Yochanan. Amar Lo, Amar Rabbi Abo, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Halachik Rabbi Lazar ben Azariah, Ben B'chamish Shabbos, Ben B'chamish Erev Shabbos. That the halacha is like Rabbi Lazar ben Azariah, you can bathe the baby on the third day, regardless of whether you have water cooked before Shabbos and you can use that, or if you don't, you can even heat water on Shabbos in order to give the baby a bath. And you can bathe the baby entirely, or only the wound area. And all this is allowed because it is assumed to be a danger for the baby if you don't wash and clean the wound properly. Gufa. So now let's analyze the comparison that we made before by quoting Rab, who said that every wound you can put oil and hot water on. You do not withhold warm water and oil on from a wound on Shabbos. Shmuel says you don't put it directly on the wound. However, you can put it on near the wound and let it go and let it drip on there. This is in general, as we talked about multiple times now, for wounds that are not actually dangerous and wounds that are not changing and an ailment that's not really changing the way you go about your day. So it's annoying and irritating, but not necessarily altering your day. You don't have to change anything you're doing. The halachic term is nafal mishkav. It requires you laying down. If you don't have such a wound or an ailment, then we don't do medicinal remedies on Shabbos on account of that you may end up making a potion which requires grinding or cooking, and these are things that are prohibited on Shabbos. So mild irritations you don't heal on Shabbos. So if you have this wound, it's not in danger and it's not changing the way you go about. So Shmuel says you can't put even oil and warm water, which is a remedy on it. You would have to put it near it and let it run on. Mesave. Well, we have a brisa that says you're not allowed to put the oil and warm water on a gauze to put it on the wound, the Shabbos. So we see over there that you can't put it on. No, there you're allowed to put it. There the concern is something else, that you're going to squeeze it. And we know that once you have a cloth that has a liquid in it, and you're going to squeeze it, you're extracting, and that's similar to the extraction of juice from a fruit, and that's called schita, and is prohibited. Tashama. Well, it says even if the gauze is already on the wound, you can't put it and drip more warm water or oil on it. Still, the concern over there is that you may squeeze it onto the wound. And we have a brisa that concurs with Shmuel that you don't put the warm water and oil directly on the wound, but rather near it and let it run on and drip on. You don't put it on the wound directly, but you put it next to it and let it drip on. Another brisa teaches you're allowed to put a new fresh gauze or a fresh sponge on the wound. But you can't put this seaweed and this gemi on it. And also not fresh worn out cloth, so rags, yovation that are dry. Kashik ksisim aksisim. Well, isn't moch the gauze and ksisim the same? And we have a contradiction in the brisa itself. One says you can put on a moch, and one says you cannot put on ksisim. Well, it depends whether it's new gauze actually helps the healing, and that you can't put on because it's seen as a remedy. But an old one that you had on already before, you can put back on. So we see fresh gauze is a form of healing, and if it's not a sakana, if it's not a danger to the wound, and it's just a mild irritation, so then you're not allowed to put on this gauze, a fresh gauze. Back to the Mishnah. The Mishnah ended off with the halacha of a suffix. A suffix is a place of doubt of whether there's an obligation to do the bris. So you can't do it on Shabbos, because in order to do a bris on Shabbos, it has to be that is the mitzvah that will supersede the day of Shabbos, because the bris itself is a prohibited melacha. You're not allowed to cause a wound. You're not allowed to cause blood letting. And obviously, a bris, a healthy baby, will bleed. So Tana Abanan are lasei vaday derches haShabbos v'lo suffix derches haShabbos. So the Torah says twice, actually, as we'll see. It says v'yom hashmini yimol b'sar lasei. On the 8th day, you will circumcise the flesh of his foreskin. But it says ar laso, his foreskin, meaning someone particular. Well, what is that his? And it says it again also by an adult. It says that adult also has to have a bris, and it says if he does not have, he does not circumcise his arla, so again his arla. And we're gonna say a drash for what that teaches us. So the Gemara says arla, so his, meaning a child that we know it's his 8th day. Then you could do it even on Shabbos. But not when there's a doubt. When there's a doubt, then you do not do his bris. So what does that exclude? So the Gemara says, and we're now on Kuf Lamed Hey Amud Aleph, 135a. Arla soy vadei derches haShabbos, when you know for sure that his bris must be done, so that supersedes Shabbos. But not an androgynous person who has both male and female genitalia. Derches Shabbos. So that would not supersede Shabbos, because we don't know whether he's a male and whether he needs a bris. Rabbi Yehuda androgynous derches haShabbos. Rabbi Yehuda says no, an androgynous person it does have to have a bris, and therefore the bris won't supersede Shabbos. V'anish kares. And if he doesn't do a bris, then he gets kares as a punishment, meaning that his soul is cut off from its source. Arla so vadai derechas Shabbos. So what does it mean that arla so his arla the when you're certain? It means not a child that was born between sunset and nightfall. Because if he was born between sunset and nightfall, at that point, we don't know whether the Shabbos is actually the 8th day. Maybe he was already born on Friday. And then it's a 9th day. And as we've said, you only do a bris on the 8th day on Shabbos. If it's not the 8th day, it doesn't supersede Shabbos.
Got a question?
Also, 1 second, please. Let's go to the last line. When you know for sure that it's an arla, that it's a mitzvah on Shabbos, it supersedes Shabbos. But not if the child was born already circumcised. That's very rare, by the way. Most of the time, when somebody looks like that they don't have a foreskin, they actually have a foreskin, but there's a condition called hypospadias, where the urethra is off the tip of the glands. It's all somewhere in the shaft, and therefore the foreskin is pulled back. But there is foreskin. But there is such a thing where, as rare as it is, for a child to be born without a foreskin, and that does not supersede Shabbos. Why? Because at this version, the Gemara is going to say there's a machlokas whether or not such a child even needs a little needle prick to remove some blood, to let some blood out for the bris.
Quick questions. We generally say it is suffix doraisa is v'hachmir. So is that what they're arguing here, or are they saying no? There's a specific drasha that excludes androgynous. Are they questioning whether suffix doraisa is v'hachmir? Because if so, then if it's a suffix, then it's a suffix, but it's a midoraisa. Or are they saying that there's a specific drasha here?
We're looking whether you do it on Shabbos.
Right.
So where's your lahachmir? You're being lenient to doing a bris on Shabbos. I mean, there's a how you.
B'yom hashmini, timol arlosoi. It says b'yom hashmini.
Yeah, but if you don't know whether this is obligated, how you're being strict? You're being lenient on one end and strict on the other end. You have a mitzvah to do. You have a prohibition not to do. If you're being strict and say, you know what, you have to be strict and do the bris. Yeah, but you're being lenient on Shabbos. Who tells you to be strict on one where there's a leniency on the other? True, you're going to be strict and say, look, in a place of doubt, we do a mitzvah. That's true, but not on Shabbos, because then in doubt you're breaking Shabbos.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. Yeah.
I thought you were going to ask Tues's question, which is a fundamental question. Why do I need a special teaching of our Lassa to tell me that you don't do a bris on Shabbos in a place of doubt? You always know that you can't break Shabbos in doubt. You have to know for sure that you're allowed to break Shabbos in order to break Shabbos. You can't just say, well, maybe I'm allowed to, so therefore maybe this is a mitzvah and therefore I'm going to do it. You never have a suffix. So why would you assume that you would break Shabbos in such a place of doubt that you need a special teaching? So Tues actually says it's an asmachta. You really don't need it's not an extra word. We're just using it as a support for the concept.
Thanks for making my day. You assumed that I was going to ask Tues this question. That's not going to get better than that.
Well, it would if you actually asked us this question. Omar Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar. So Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar said, actually, Beit Shammai and Basila never had a machlokas about this. If a child was born with without a foreskin, there is no argument of a child born with no foreskin. That it does require a little bit of a bloodletting. Because it's not really that there's no foreskin, it's just that the foreskin is somehow attached to the glands. Rather, it's the question was whether or not a convert who already had a circumcision prior to becoming Jewish and now is coming to have his conversion and does not have foreskin to remove, so they don't do a bris. So do they need a bloodletting? Beishamai say that you do need it. And Basil say you don't need to remove this. Tues here at length has a text changed with a lot of proof that actually this hill is the one that says that you do have to do a hatafas tam bris, and as you will know, that's the way the halacha is, that if somebody is going to do, if somebody comes to convert and already had a circumcision, they do need hatafas tam bris in order to do the conversion. So we're going to analyze this. A doubt does not supersede Shabbos. You have to know for sure there's a mitzvah of bris, otherwise it does not supersede Shabbos. What is that added? Now, see, it brings what the Brisa teaches here. Ben Shiva Machalavas Shabbos. This is one of the tragic realities that they lived with back when, that an infant born in the eighth month never survived and couldn't. It was basically a stillborn that struggled a little bit and then passed, and they had no way of helping that child. If it was born in the 7th month, for whatever reason, that was had a better chance of survival, and they would try and save that child. So Ben Shiva Machal was a Shabbos. An infant child born in its 7th month of gestation, then you would break Shabbos to try and save it. Ben Ches Machal was a Shabbos, but born in the 8th month, as counterintuitive as it is, that had no chance of survival, and you would not break Shabbos. Obviously, today that's we can save children even much earlier than that, and we break Shabbos for them. So Safek Ben Zayin, Safek Ben Ches, if we have a doubt whether this is in the 7th or 8th month of gestation, Shabbos, so you won't break Shabbos because you don't have enough basis to assume that there's any way of saving this child. Ben Shemana Reika Evan, and therefore a stillborn in its 8th month of gestation is really just like a stone. It is a non-living being. Therefore, it's muktzah, and you're not allowed to move it. But the mother can express milk over it into its mouth for her own danger, for her own need of expressing milk, because she shouldn't get engorged. Itmar Rav Malachi Tanakama. Rav says Allah is like the Tanakama. Shmuel Malachi Rabbi Shimon Elazar, and Shmuel says the Allah is like Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar. That whether or not you can remove, whether or not there's a mitzvah in of a bris or removing the foreskin or doing a hatafas dam bris, doing a bloodletting for a child born without a foreskin. The Gemara tells us a tragic story. From Adabarava, there was a child born to him, Kishumo, that had no foreskin. So he went to every, and the bris was on Shabbos, meant to be on Shabbos, but he had no foreskin. So he took him around to all the mahalim that he knew, 13 mahalim. But everybody said, look, I can't do a bris on Shabbos for such a kid because I'm not sure he needs a bris, and so therefore we can't do anything. So he decided, well, this kid needs a bris, and today is a mitzvah, so he did it himself, and he injured the urethra and caused the kid to be a krashafka, having a torn urethra. Adashavi krashafka. Amar Tesili. He said, I deserve that. What a terrible thing I did. The Avri Adarav, because if I had listened to Rav, I would and accepted what he's taught, then I would not have made this mistake. Rav Nachman said, wait, not only Rav, Shmuel also. Even though Shmuel held that the halacha is like Rav Shimon ben Elazar, that both Bisham and Basil obligate a hatafas tam bris for this, but nevertheless, Shmuel maybe Shmuel only said this on a weekday. The Shabbos miyamar, but to do it on Shabbos, would Shmuel have said that the halacha is like Shimon and Elazar, that you would even do this hatafas dam bris on Shabbos? Of course not. Who savar vaday or lekavushay. But Rav Ada bar Abba, who did this, he was under the impression that this was for sure was a foreskin, and he had a mitzvah to do, and the mitzvah was so strong that it even superseded Shabbos, and therefore, if no male would do it, he would do it himself, and unfortunately endangered his skin. As we learned that Rabbah says that would concern maybe there's an arla there, there's a foreskin there that is somehow attached to the glands. Rav Yosef said no, for sure. There's no such thing as a child being born without a foreskin, and therefore it must be that it's there somewhere. Rav Yosef said, how do I know that this is true, that for sure there's a foreskin there? Because Rabbi Elazar HaKapra said that everybody, both Bisham and Yisrael, will agree that you need to do a bloodletting for such a child. Now, why do you have to? Why do they agree? And the machlokas was only in regards to whether or not you even do it on Shabbos. That you even do it on Shabbos. If we still say no, you don't do it on Shabbos, even though there's an obligation to do this bloodletting, but it doesn't have to be done on Shabbos. From the fact that he says that the machlokas is only in regards to whether or not you do it on Shabbos, that means the first opinion held that you do it on Shabbos. It must be that the reason why you do it on Shabbos is on account of that you know for sure that there's a foreskin there. It's just a question of where it is, and that you have to do a bloodletting for that. No. How do you know that everybody that the first opinion holds that everybody agrees you do it on Shabbos? Maybe he holds that everybody agrees that you don't do it on Shabbos. Well, then what Rabbi Elazar Kapra is doing is he's teaching us the opinion of Beis Shammai of why you're allowed to do it on Shabbos. Dilma hachikama. No, what it means to say is that Beis Shammai still never had a disagreement in regards to whether or not you do it on Shabbos, and whether or not there's a foreskin there. In any case, this is all to understand what the mistake of Rav Ada bar Abba was. But the halacha is that such a child does need a bloodletting. It does need a hatafas dam bris, and it does not get done on Shabbos. The Gemara continues the teaching that in the beginning of Parshas Toldos, the Torah talks about the korban and the tumah and the tahara, both the tumah process and the tahara process of a afterbirth or postpartum for a woman. And there it says, on the 8th day you will do a bris. So the Gemara is going to tell us that only somebody that the mother has tumah, does the bris have to be done on the 8th day. We're going to get into various cases where the bris does not have to be done on the 8th day. Not just that it doesn't, not on Shabbos, but in general, this mitzvah of doing the bris on the 8th day would not apply, and it could be done even on the first day. Amar Ravasi. So Ravasi said, if the mother is Jewish at the time of birth, and the birth was in a typical form where through the birth canal, so therefore it was a typical birth, then the child has a bris on the 8th day. If it's an atypical birth, or the mother was not Jewish and therefore doesn't have the halachas of tumah of afterbirth for 8 days, for the 7 days, and therefore it would not be the bris on the 8th day. If the mother does not have tumah of leda, so then there would not be an 8th day on the 8th day, a bris on the 8th day. Shanema, it says, a woman gives seeds, meaning that where she receives seed is where she gives birth. And gives birth to a male. She's going to be tummy for 7 days. And on the 8th day, a bris will be done for the child. Abai says, no, I can prove it to you from earlier generations. Because there is no tumah of birth for Yitzchak, Yaakov, the Jews in Egypt, the Bnei Israel, all of the generations prior to the Torah, as children of Abraham, they did a bris on the 8th day, but their mothers didn't have the halachas of tumah. The halachas of tumah only came with the Torah. And you see yet that B'nim L'Shmona, the bris was on the 8th day. Amalei said, you're right. Of course, in that time, even if the mother was not Tamei Leda, they did not have the tumah of after birth. Nevertheless, the bris was on the 8th day. But Nitna Torah, once the Torah was given, and now we turn to Kuflav and Ham with base, and the halacha was renewed with this caveat that it has to be that the mother is tamei in order for the child to have a bris on the 8th day. Aini, it's not so. But we learned a Caesarean or someone who has a double foreskin. One says that the bris is done on Shabbos, and one says the bris is not done on Shabbos. So the only machlokas is whether or not, if the 8th day is on Shabbos, whether you do the bris on Shabbos or not. But they both agree that the 8th day is the day that the bris is supposed to be done. So Gemara says, no, what it means is the reason why the bris can supersede Shabbos is because the 8th day is when the mitzvah is. But the other one who says that the bris does not supersede Shabbos, the reason is because actually you don't do the bris on the 8th day. You already do the bris from the first day. So Ketanoi. So we're going to see that this is based on a machlokas Tanoim. In order to understand this machlokas, a little bit about the process of servitude or child born in servitude in halacha in the Torah. We know that there are two forms of conversion to Judaism. There's a full conversion and a part conversion. And somebody who would sell themselves to a Jew would have to accept Torah and go to the mikveh. And if they do so, then they go into avdas, into servitude. They have 1 year to after the transaction, selling themselves to the Jew, that they have to accept the Torah and go to mitzvah and go to the mikveh. And if they don't, they are free to go. That's an automatic emancipation. So this process is called kinyan kaspo, someone acquired by money, versus yilid bias, a child born already to a Jewish mother, a partially Jewish mother, because the mother did this process of gerus. So they're obligated in the mitzvahs and therefore obligated in the bris. If the mother already went through this mikvah process prior to becoming pregnant or prior to giving birth, so then the child is born as a Jew and a Bal Halacha and is obligated in the mitzvah of bris milah. So therefore the bris would be on the 8th day. If, however, the child was born prior to the mother choosing to go to the mikvah, so then then the bris would not be on the 8th day because the child was not born as a Jew, and the bris is even as soon as they go to the mikvah that same day as a convert. So essentially, someone converting could be going to the mikvah on day 1. And having a bris on day 1, because their conversion happens on day 1, so that's possible. So we now have two forms of when a child would have either a bris on the first day or on the 8th day, when they are when their mother essentially is the first in the servitude. When born in servitude, also will have one, and that's what the Gemara, either on the first day or the 8th day, and the Gemara is going to tell us machlokas of how that's possible, where they were born in servitude already, so they should have been born as a Jew, and nevertheless, there's going to be this first day bris, not the 8th day bris, which would indicate that they were not born as a Jew. And the basis for this is that the Torah seems to say twice this halacha of mikne kesef yulid beso, someone born in the house or born or acquired. And either way, and once the Torah says 8th day bris, and once the Torah does not say 8th day bris. Both times the Torah says a bris, but once on the 8th day and once not, to indicate that there's a obligation to do the bris on the 8th day, that it's born to a Jew, and the mitzvah is the 8th day bris. And one tells us that it is not born to a Jew, and so it's not an 8th day bris. So to have this machlekes tanoi, yesh yilid bayesh ani malechot. There's a child born in the home, meaning born already a part of the household, and therefore the bris is done on day one. And it could be a case where it's a Jew, and therefore it is an 8th day bris. And there's an acquired a servant that the bris would be on the first day. And there's one where it would be on the 8th day. So what is the cases? So where they are new and just acquired that they would be a first day or 8th day. So what's that case? So he acquires this servant that is pregnant. And then she gave birth while already after the mikvah. So she is already a Jewess, and therefore her child is going to get a bris on the 8th day, born to someone who's already obligated in mitzvahs and Torah. But if she had given birth prior to going to the mikvah, so therefore it is a child already beforehand, and therefore the bris would be done as soon as they go to the mikvah, which could be on day one. And even born already in the household. When would be the bris? When would the bris be done on the 8th day? She became pregnant in the household. And gave birth. So that's a regular birth after the mother had already gone to the mikvah. So she is already she only conceived after, and so it's a regular birth in the household. And Rav Chama Omer that she gave birth and then she went to the mikvah. That's a yilid bayis, that it goes to the mikvah on the that the bris can be done on the first day, because it was even though that she was already in servitude, so it's a part of the family, but she went to the mikvah after she already gave birth, and therefore the 8th day, the first day already, the bris can be done because it's a new conversion. It's bila, but if she went to the mikvah after and thereafter she gave birth, so there, even though they were born in the household already, it was the mikvah happened only now, and therefore she went to the mikvah and then gave birth. So the child was born as a Jew, obligated in mitzvahs, and needs a bris on the 8th day. The Tanakama. So what about the Tanakama? He doesn't make this distinction. He makes this. It makes no such distinction, and he says that since the mother is going to be not going to be tamei leda, even though the mother is not going to be tamei leda, because either way that happened, the woman would not be tamei, and nevertheless the child needs a bris on the 8th day. That's what he's saying, that it counts as yilid bayis because it was in the household. So the Gemara challenges. So according to Rav Chama, we find a child born on the in the household because the mother was already in servitude, and the bris will be on the first day. Yilid bayis nimalaches, and we have that the mother had gone to the mikvah, so this child was born in the household, and mother was already conceived while already gone to the mikvah, and therefore the child was born as a Jew and needs a bris on the 8th day. And also in a new acquisition in the same way, depending on when she went to the mikvah. If she gave birth and then went to mikvah, there that's going to be born in the household that needs a bris on the first day. If she went to the mikveh first and then gave birth, then that child's born as a Jew and needs a bris on the 8th day. And in a new acquisition, also the bris on the 8th day, where she was pregnant at the time of the transaction and went to the mikveh prior to giving birth. So therefore, the child is going to have a bris on the 8th day because the child was born as a Jew. And where would it be that a new acquisition where the child goes, where the bris is even on the first day? So we could say a case where the child was born prior to the mikvah. The Gemara tells us a case where the mother sells herself to one family and her offspring to another, where therefore the child not being a part of the family of where the mother is going can get a bris on the first day. Elo Tanakam. But according to the first opinion, so we have an explanation for all of them, the same as the Rav Chama. Where is it a case where the mother is already in the household and yet the bris would only be on the first day? Where the mother sells herself into servitude, but not herself. She sells her offspring into servitude, and she's only pregnant. She's not even the child's not even born yet. So in that case, that child is, even though that the acquisition was made before the birth, the child, since the mother is not Jewish, the child will be, and the bris is done after. Wait, but that's not a real acquisition. There's a halachic concept of kinyan peiros. Since this is very awkward nowadays, we don't talk about servitude this way. So let's go into fields and property, real property. So you have a field and you sell off all the produce that grows on your field for the next 30 years. So that's a long-term lease, but that's not a real acquisition. That's commodity acquisition. That's a machlokas. Do we say kinyan peiros kinyan aguf? When you acquire the rights to all produce, do you also acquire the rights of the real property? Or do we say, no, that since you acquired the entirety of the fructus, of the produce coming from this real property, that's an acquisition, that is a form of acquisition in the real property itself. And the Gemara is using that idea in this case over here, where this woman sells off her offspring prior to them being born. Do we say that's just kinyan peiros, that you have rights to the handiwork of this child, and therefore the child would not be Jewish and not need bris, or not? Kinyan peiros lav kinyan aguf dami. Well, then, when the mother sells off her offspring, she's also selling herself off, because that's a kinyan peiros. The real property itself would be sold off. So in this case over here, where she's selling off her offspring, she herself is also becoming Jewish. She'd have to go to the mikveh in order for this to go through as a proper abdus. And within a year, she'd have to go to the mikveh, and the child would be Jewish too. So here we come to this idea where she sells herself off with the condition that she's not going to go to the mikveh. And when the original condition of the servitude that she sells herself off is with the condition of not going to the mikveh, so she will never become obligated in the mitzvahs, and therefore her child also would not be obligated in the mitzvahs, unless she sells off the offspring in that way, where she says, I'm not going to convert, but my child will, and so he gets the mitzvahs, and he would have to have a bris, And since the mother is not obligated in mitzvahs, the child would have a bris even on the first day. Yeah, that's as awkward as that is, and difficult to go through. Nevertheless, this is the concept of having a bris on the first day for children born in servitude. In this case, where either a mother herself is not converting, but selling her offspring off into servitude, or when the conversion was done after the child was born. And this is true in any gerus as well. If a woman converts to Judaism, like we would do today in a typical conversion and not in servitude, and she had just given birth, let's say the baby's 3 days old, so since the baby wasn't born as a Jew, the bris would be as soon as the baby is born, as soon as they go into the mikvahs, which is essentially the bris can be done on the third day. Obviously, we wouldn't do it and we would wait these days, but that is the concept, the halachic concept of doing a bris on the first day before the